All right, so last week we went through neuropotentiation, and we talked about that. We also talked about neural inhibition. Thank you, Emily, for telling us how you use those and what kind of, in what capacity you use those, and how you implemented those into your training for the week, and for how you implemented into changing how your members are using the devices too. So this week we're going to go through a couple other vocabulary words. Again, these are vocabulary words that a lot of times I use the vocab word, like I'll say these things, I'll say axial bone loading, but then I will make it make sense to who I'm talking to, right? So I'm talking about what this is and why this is important. I'm talking about neural inhibition, why that's important, but then I'm making it make sense to the person, okay? So while vocab words are incredibly important for you and your staff to know, it's even more important to know how to make it make sense, okay, to the general population. But axial bone loading, so let's just kick in, right? Axial bone loading refers to the compression force applied to the bones along their long axis, okay? So I have my little blender right here that I was blending my coffee with. And so if you think about this as being your femur, okay, you think this is a long, strong, high thigh bone, okay, your femur. And axial bone loading is when you are loading from the bottom of that to the top of that, and you're putting compression down into that. That's axial loading. So, and I take a pen when I'm talking to people, I'm talking to them with a pen. This is your femur, axial loading. This type of loading is most commonly seen in weight-bearing activities like walking, running, or jumping, where forces acting on the body are directed through the bones, creating a compressive load. Okay, this is that compression, that impact stimulation, which is another vocabulary word we'll talk about later. The bones in our legs, arms, and spine are especially designed to tolerate axial loading, as they are typically the ones that bear the most of our body's weight during these exercises. So over here, I don't have any presentation mode, guys, so I'm fiddling around with my slides here. But we want to talk about ways that we do axial loading in our centers. So these are really, you guys probably already know this. I know you do, but maybe your staff doesn't understand this. And maybe it's we just don't want the smallest things to go unknown here. This is a pretty big deal. Upper growth trigger, the axial loading here is the humerus, the ulna, the radius, the scapula, and the ribs, okay? When you are on the upper growth trigger, when you compress, you have the seat behind you, you have the handles in front of you, and as you're pushing forward, you are pushing back on that chair, and you're creating axial load through the arms, and then also through the scapula and the rib cage, okay? Lower growth trigger would be the tibia, fibula, femur, and pelvic, okay? So same situation. You're sitting with a seat behind you and a leg and a foot pad here. And as you compress, as you push against the back and push against the front, you're creating load on each one of those bones, okay? Okay, now that's axial loading. Core growth trigger, and I have an asterisk there because we really need to talk about this. The rib cage, so the core doesn't actually do a lot of axial loading, okay? Axial loading, the compression from end to end of bone, is what is determined to be the most effective for increasing bone density, for producing osteogenesis. We know that based on the science that's been done and the studies that have been done. We also know that the second best way for you to increase osteogenesis or to improve bone density is to have your muscles pushing and pulling on the bone, okay? So having these muscles that are surrounding the bone put stress on the bone. So it's not really pushing, but it's pulling, it's stressing the bone. And when the bone can be stressed, it will produce, it will respond to that adaptive response, which is what we're going to talk about next. But so the core growth trigger, when you're in that device, there's not an actual axial loading that's happening there, okay? It is more along the lines of, it does two things. So the core is really important because it does help all of the bones in the rib cage, since they're very small bones, they actually can respond really well just to some pushing and pulling. They don't have to have a lot of axial to respond. Your bigger bones like the humerus, ulna, radius, scapula, tibia, fibia, those big bones, they do need that axial load and a large amount of load in order to trigger that high level of osteogenesis. The ribs aren't as they aren't as needy. Okay, they're smaller, they aren't as needy. And so they're cool with just responding to the push and pull and the stress of the muscles pulling on them. Okay, and the muscles giving them some movement there. So the core does that. The core is therefore the rib cage is stressed by contractions of the core muscle. It's also super beneficial for getting your core area ready for the postural growth trigger. In fact, when you have members come in, please never start anyone on the postural. Okay, even if all of the devices are busy but the posture is open, please never walk your member over to the postural growth trigger and say, hey, let's just start here because it's the only one that's open. The postural, the PGT, needs the entire body really turned on at its highest level. But most importantly, it needs to have the core done first. The reason for that is because if the core is not engaged, if it is not engaged around that spine and around your ribs, you have a higher chance of an injury. And so the core, the CGT does two things. One, it stresses the rib cage by contractions of the core muscles, but two, it gets your body ready for the postural. It gets your rib cage ready. It gets your spinal column ready and your vertebrae system, your whole center ready for that postural growth trigger. Okay, so it's super important, but it's just not a lot of axial loading. Postural growth trigger. Each vertebra, so each little itty bitty vertebra. So here's my little chapstick, right? They're littler than a pin, but each vertebra it has contraction. Okay, it has axial loading on it by the pelvic, the tibia, the fibia, the femur, and the scapula. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on this? All make sense?
Hey Tammy, real quick.
Yes.
I have one. So I was taking a member through on Friday actually, and I was kind of curious. She was a negative 4.8 in her L4, and going back to the postural, I'm like kind of like I know obviously slow start protocol for sure, but how would is that something you would like actually get her started with? Not like started with like how should I put this? Like to actually have her go through that movement.
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay. In fact, this is something that we covered on my new owners call Thursday because slow start protocol, like what does that mean? Where does it start? Where does it end? Like who are the people that we should be putting on these devices, that kind of thing. Okay, so that's a great question. You said a negative 4.8. All right, is that what you said, Ryan?
Yeah, right in the L4.
Yeah, so actually, if they are over a negative 4, I wouldn't even start their process on the postural. Okay, I would have them do upper, lower, and core. Okay, and make sure that everything's done right and they're feeling great for probably about 4 sessions prior to even putting them onto the postural. Now, while they're not using the postural, I would so anything over 4, guys, just hold off on the postural. But don't not do the movement. Take them over to the wall and have them be practicing the movement for when it is time to do it. Okay? Get them in the right mind frame of how the exact form should feel for about 4 weeks prior to even putting them on. And then when you do put them on, it is very, very slow start. Okay, which means that when I talk about slow start protocol, I mean 50% or less of their push or pull. And sometimes they don't know what that is because they've never maybe been there before. And so they don't know what 50% really feels like. But like when you start to see them, like they'll be moving into it and you'll start to see their body start to really engage. You just want to hold them there in the engagement. You don't want to have them stress. Okay. You just want to get them to a point where you start to see, okay, they're working, but they're not overworking. They're not working too hard right now. And then you go by increments. Then you have them engage by pound increments going up or MOB increments going up. Okay. So one of the easiest ways to increase on the postural is when you say, okay, we're going to go ahead and do 1 MOB, right? Or a 0.5 MOB here to start out with. And then next week, we're going to go up to 0.6. And then the next week, we're going to go to 0.7, okay? So Ryan, with that is a really sensitive and higher risk individual. And so you're right in asking, would I even put them on the postural? Knowing that T-score, I probably wouldn't start them out there. I would say, hey, let's get these 3 going. And in fact, I might only do the upper and the lower and then a little bit of the core, but I might have them work up to the core later. And then, yes, super slow protocol on everything. So start out really low on everything. This is one of the reasons why we went to results wall instead of strength wall, is because when we have people that come in that need to start out slow start, and they're going only maybe 50% of their max of their actual max effort, their numbers clear down here. They could have gone more, but then let's say they come in, 4 weeks later, 5 weeks later, and they're like, boom, 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 boom. Their number will say that they increased in strength by 200, 250%. When really it's not that they did that. It's that they were able to increase the amount of pressure that they put on their body without an injury. And that's ultimately what we're doing here. How much pressure can you put on each bone without risk of injury? This is impact stimulation. And so can we put this much on without risk of injury and your body feels great? Good. Now let's go to here. Now let's go to here. Now let's go to here. And let's get the results along the way. And let's not worry about that big strength increase, because it's not about strength increase. It's actually about how much load you can put on your body without risk of injury. All right. Does that answer your question, Ryan?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So like -3, I would do slow start protocol, and I would probably introduce every machine to a -3. -8, I would start to pull back. Or sorry, -3.8. I would start to pull back. So I'd start going, let's do upper, lower, and core. And then at a -4, I would say upper, lower, core, hold off on postural for a while. And then anything, and then work them through there. So that's kind of my rule of thumb. Yeah, okay. Hope that helps y'all. Oh, back to that, I guess, Ryan, and anybody else that are taking notes on this. We use that red, yellow, green intake form. If you use the old health history form, there is a section to ask what their T-score is. Some people know their T-score and some people don't. So sometimes they come in and say, I have osteoporosis. And you're like, okay, what's your T-score? And they're like, you know what? I don't know. I would, how long have you had osteoporosis? Well, for 20 years. You know that the osteoporosis over the last 20 years, I mean, they're fully declined. and deconditioned. And so you're probably looking at a 3+, maybe 4. If they don't know their T-score, I would really ask them to get that for you prior to introduction to a full-fledged postural pull. Okay. All right. Ready to move on to the next couple here. Neurological trigger. Okay. A neurological trigger refers to a stimulus that initiates a specific neurological response or behavior. This can be something internal like a thought or an emotion, or it can be external like a sound or a sight. When a trigger occurs, it activates certain neurons or neural pathways in the brain, causing an immediate response or behavior. And a lot of times it's involuntary, so it just happens, right? It's just a natural response. Neurological trigger is the trigger or the event that leads to a response. Okay, so when we talk about a neurological trigger being inside of the center, it's pressure on the bones. Axial loading is the trigger that triggers the adaptive response, the response of osteogenesis. So thinking about other triggers in your life, again, they can be emotional, external, they can be, but one of the things that I love to point out to my members or talk about with my members, especially those brand new ones, right, where they're trying to make sense of the science, I boil it all the way down to neurological trigger and adaptive response. These are the guys these are the two vocabulary words I just hang out with all day. And a little bit of axial loading. But axial loading is the neurological trigger here that provides the response of osteogenesis. So other triggers would be like walking from a warm room out to the blizzardy cold, right? It's freezing out there. Alaska said they got 24 inches of snow the other day, and so I assume it's very freezing there. So you have members that are walking from their warm, cozy osteostrong session out into the blistery cold. If you stay out in that cold long enough, that cold is a trigger that produces an adaptive response in the body of shivering. Okay, or they'll see their hands get blue because all of their blood is rushing to the center of their body to protect their internal organs. Okay, so those are adaptive responses to the trigger of the cold. Same thing, you go to get in a sauna, a hot sauna, and that trigger, that heat is a trigger, and the adaptive response would be sweat. Your pupils have the same, they trigger by light. Your skin triggers by heat or by cold or by, it can be triggered by a couple different things like gripping. When you're gripping, those calluses, that's an adaptive response to grip. Okay, so your cutting, when you get a paper cut or you get a skin cut or you scrape your knees, that is a trigger for the blunt force trauma, is a trigger to the skin to produce the adaptive response of scabbing. Okay, in osteostrong. So when I talk about these things, it makes people go, okay, my body is full of adaptive responses to trigger events. When you come into osteostrong, when you sit on those devices, that is your trigger event. That is what we call a new environment. I say this all the time. So when you put your body into a new environment of heat, it responds. When you put your body into a new environment of cold, it responds. When you put your body into a new environment of light or dark, it responds, right? You put your body into an environment of stress, it responds. This in here, these 4 devices are a new environment that triggers osteogenesis. The axial loading on the bones trigger the adaptive response of osteogenesis. So adaptive response is a response or a specific challenge or change in the environment that results in an improvement in an organism's chances of survival and reproduction. it refers to an organism's ability to change and adapt in response to its environment to better survive and thrive. We're surrounded by it. We're surrounded by it. Okay. And so it's very natural, supernatural. It's so interesting that 12 years ago, we didn't have any studies. This was day one. Tammy, I had a machine in a dream, right? Like I didn't even have a color. We didn't have a color. We didn't even have a name for it yet, right? Like this is where I started because this is what made sense. When John Jaquish was explaining to me neurological trigger equals adaptive response, the neurological trigger we use is axial loading because we didn't even have the 4.2 multiples of body weight study 12 years ago. We just had to make it make sense to people. This is your body's natural ability to respond, and we're putting it in an environment where your bones can respond. And it clicked for people. People got that 12 years ago before we had anything else. So when I bring these to you as vocab words, like this is our foundation. This is our foundation. This is Wolff's Law, right? But the question then becomes how much pressure, how much axial loading does it take to trigger that true adaptive response of osteogenesis? Well, based on our studies, we see that it's 4.2 in the lower, okay? Based on that study and all of that information there, and a couple other studies, we know that the rapid growth trigger on each of the other devices are 1.2.5, 1.5, 1. Right? So we have the trigger event there based on the studies that were done. But if you have a gal that comes in who's or a man that comes in who's incredibly deconditioned and they haven't put pressure on their body for years, they've not done any form of axial loading other than maybe walking, and even then they walk gingerly. They maybe use a walker to take some of the pressure off of the lower body, right? They certainly, every time they step easy. They aren't going to be the ones who just step off of a curb or step downstairs, right? Like really hard. They're not the ones that are going to jump off of a little ledge. They're ones that are very ginger. They haven't put any axial loading on their body other than their own body weight for years. Does this mean that that person needs 4.2 multiples of body weight to have a new environment, a new neurological trigger to get that adaptive response? Probably not. They don't need 4.2 multiples of their body weight to trigger osteogenesis, because their new environment might be, if they're 150 pounds, their new environment might be 175 right now. It might be 200 right now. It might be 250 right now. But does it need to be 4.2? Maybe not right yet. So if you have those gals who are coming in, or those men who are coming in and they're like, I haven't hit my triggers. I haven't hit that yellow line. I haven't hit that red line. Like, oh, this must not be working for me. If I'm not going to hit that, then I'm probably not going to be able to grow bone, right? Wrong. That study was done on, that 4.2 study was done on males in their 20s. Okay, so their new environment was different than a 60, 70-year-old man or woman who hasn't done physical activity for years. So encourage those members and say, hey, but this is a new environment, right, for you? Remember, neurological trigger is a new environment. It provides an adaptive response. So that's where we go back to these vocabulary words and we make it make sense to them and help them understand that even though you're not hitting the 4.2 that study was saying, that doesn't mean that you're not hitting a new environment for you, that you're not hitting a trigger that's going to make sense for you. Our goal here is just to see that over the course of time, we're going up. You're not going to go up every time, but over the course of time, we're seeing increases and we're putting you in a new environment every time. Okay. Or consistently down the road. So these two things are important at the beginning. These two vocabulary words are important at the beginning for your staff to understand, because when you get that pushback of I must not be doing enough, or I guess I'm not, this is never going to work for me, these are going to be important to know. Okay. And then also, again, this is our foundation. This made sense to everybody before any studies did. This made sense to everybody before the machines were sexy. This made sense to everyone before there was marketing. Okay, this is our foundation. So example of neurological trigger and adaptive response. We kind of went through these, but loading the skeleton to minimal dose, loading the muscles and holding under pressure. So this is, I'm going to come back to number 2. Actually, no, let's go here. Okay. Loading the muscles and holding under pressure. So if you have people who have seen a plateau, a good long plateau. Now remember that Dr. Jaquish often talks about his plateau being, I think, 33 months or something like that. I mean, it was ridiculous how long it was, but he just kept saying, I'm gonna go as hard as I can to where I can, and then when my body says no, I'm gonna stay there. But what he and others have found, and something that, remember, we're always learning, but we have learned that the time under tension is what it's called. It's about pushing into this is for people who need a different type of stimulus in order to put them in a new environment to get their body to respond even more. So if a person is at a plateau, let's say my buddy Ryan, he's at a plateau and he's been coming for a couple of months now, but he just cannot seem to, in fact, there's been a couple of times he went down and then he just can't seem to get over that hump, you know, and he's down and he gets, what I'm going to do with Ryan is I'm going to say, okay, Ryan, so your body, so it's cool because your bones are actually, they metabolize slower than your muscles. Your muscles are quick to respond. They get strong quick, but bones take a little while. So while the muscles get quick, the bones kind of have to catch up to it before the muscles can go again. And that's just homeostasis in the body. But while we're waiting for that, let's do this. Let's put you into a new environment. So it's going to be called time under tension. We're going to put you into the environment that you're used to getting into, okay? So that's that maximum push. But instead of coming just right back down out of it, I'm going to have you hold there, okay, for a count of 10. Now, for any, you can go a count of 5, you can go a count of 7, you can go 10, but you can hold in there. And what you want to see happening, what I want you to do, Ryan, is when you get to your max, you're going to hold, you're going to breathe, you're going to stay comfortable. And if those two things aren't happening, I got to pull you out of the movement. But if you can breathe and stay comfortable in that max push, I want you to stay there, and I want to see if you can get your line to not do a bunch of this. Okay, we're going to see if we can keep it steady, and that's time under tension. And that time under tension is so axial loading is a trigger for bones. Time under tension is a trigger for muscles. Okay, that's a new environment for the body. That's a change up. That's something that you can do to get more response later on. And it helps the member not get bored with plateauing and not get discouraged with plateauing. I actually watched Jaquish do this. In fact, on his old device, his very first device, that was way less accommodating than the ones we have now. It did allow for a 5-second hold. It allowed for a 10-second hold, and I think if I can remember correctly, it even allowed for a 20-second hold. But it was a time under tension understanding, and we can do that now with Spectrum as well. So again, always learning, but this is something that we've learned in the last couple of years that we think we need to bring this back. This is something that can really help people move forward and advance in what they're doing. Pulse electromagnetic therapy, that's something that is a neurological trigger that leads to an adaptive response in the body and in the cells. Hydromassage and compression, also a trigger that responds, that the adaptive response would be more of a serotonin, more of a relaxation kind of response. Balance work on the vibe. Man, notice that every single vocabulary word that we've used comes back to some of the work that you can do on the vibe. So balance work on the vibe can be a trigger. I'm out of balance. I need to do something to protect myself. Proprioception, learn how to balance. Okay, so it's that training. And then of course osteoblast. Okay, any discussion around that before we move on? Everybody's good there? Okay, fantastic. I'm gonna go to one more. Multiples of body weight. This is really a simple one. You guys all know your MOBs, but for those of you who are maybe new, MOB is a new term to you, but it is multiples of body weight. It's the dosage that we use at OsteoStrong. When we talk about multiples of body weight, we often refer to the amount of force or load that is imposed on the body during certain activities, particularly those that involve impact or weight-bearing activities. For instance, it is commonly suggested that during walking, the force is usually around 1 to 1.5 MOBs. So that's your body weight, or maybe a little bit more if you're running and there's a little bit of a bounce, right? You're hitting that pavement. Running can be 2 to 3. Similarly, during jumping or landing from a height, the forces on the body can be 4 to 5 times or higher than your usual body weight. There's actually an app on your phone. I haven't even ever used it, to be honest, but there is an app on your phone that if you were to take and download it, if you jump from a box and you jump down on the ground, it will measure your MOBs, how many multiples of body weight hit, and you would have to be jumping. I haven't used it. I've seen other people use it. There's videos all over about it. But I see people jump from a box height, you know, a 24 inch box, and I see them jump from a countertop height. And it seems that they have to get countertop height or higher to be in that, and then not like when they land, not do a soft landing. They have to kind of hit hard in order to get that 4 to 5 multiples of body weight. So that's that impact that's necessary to trigger that osteogenesis for individuals. That's not going to be safe for the majority of our clientele. And so we have impact emulation is what it is. So it's emulating that same amount of force of jumping off of a countertop and landing hard is what we can do with that lower growth trigger. So that's pretty awesome. This is these two together, these three together, the neurological trigger. What is necessary? What is the trigger for bones? What is the trigger for muscle? Right? What is the trigger? What is the response to that trigger? And then how much dosage do you need in order to get there? Okay, we talked a little bit about the MOBs being maybe different for a super deconditioned person than somebody who's a little bit more active. But I think this is a good start today. I'm gonna stop there. So based on all of that, guys, do we have any discussion for today, or did you learn anything new? Or were you reminded of something? I need some feedback here from y'all.
My feedback is that a lot of this stuck with me because you trained it in Florida, and although I wasn't there forever, it really stuck. So this does not sound new to me. It sounds like you.
That's great.
This yeah. So
because this is how you make it make sense, and when it makes sense, it always makes sense. That's an important part of educating people, is making it stick, right? And when people can talk about what's going, when you can empower people with this kind of education and understanding. So when you're putting together your strong talks, doing strong talks on these vocabulary words, I mean, you would probably want it to be a little bit more entertaining than what we're doing right here. But to do strong talks on these vocabulary words can really make it make sense for the member in a way that they can actually go and talk about it. I told you 12 years ago, this is all we had, was a couple of different concepts and a couple of vocabulary words. And so here I was, a crazy woman with a whiteboard and an expo marker explaining these concepts to people in a stick man drawing. Okay. But when I did that, it was crazy because they would go out and tell their friends. Maybe they told their friends, I have no idea what she said, but it made sense. Maybe that's all they said. Okay. But maybe they went out and told their friends, hey, so did you know this? Did you know that this? Did you know this? Yeah, Tammy at Austria Strong told me that, and I go now. So giving them education about what they are doing and why it is working is stickability. It's retention. They know now that they can't get this anywhere else. They know now that this is what it takes to get to where they want to go, especially in the areas of osteoporosis, osteopenia, and then we can even get into the trigger response of diabetes, the adaptive response of building myofibrils in the body, and then how that helps with A1C. So there's a lot here, I know, but I love that it stuck with you. That's great. Any other feedback about today's words or how you can use them to, how you can implement them, or does anybody implement them currently? Are these the words that are coming out of your mouth? There's no words coming out of anybody's mouth but mine today. Y'all?
I think for me, it was kind of the same thing that Ryan just said of how hearing things repeated is when it really starts to stick. And so like when you were in Utah and doing the training for us here, and you talked for the first time that I recall hearing how you shouldn't do the postural first. And so being able to explain the importance of that to our members has been great, not only for us, but for them as well.
Good. Awesome. That's great. That's a big safety issue. Love that. Well, awesome, guys. Okay, so here's your challenge this week. I'll leave you with this. Your challenge is to take this with you and try to implement. And I would be, and the people on this call would be the only ones that know if you're messing it up. Okay, your members are not going to know if you're messing it up or not. Fumble through this a little bit. Say, you know, here's why OsteoStrong works. Here's the science behind it in a super easy to understand way. We have a trigger, and then our body responds to it, just like when we walk outside. So when we do this, the trigger is pressure, and then the pressure has to be axial loading, and the response is osteogenesis, bone growth, right? And then walk them through that concept a little bit. Walk them through what that means, because when you do that, make it make sense to them. Give somebody some education this week. I know it's going to be a short week for a lot of you since it's Thanksgiving week, but maybe this needs to be saved for a staff training or something. But I want you to start implementing this stuff. I want you to start bringing these concepts to your people in a way that they can understand and they can wrap their heads around, because it's your retention. It's retention. If they only think that they're coming and pushing on a device and watching the screen, and that's supposed to be building their bones, they're going to cancel. Okay. But if they understand what is happening behind the scenes inside of the body, they're going to trust the process a little bit more. So while this is education, it's also a lot of retention as well. Okay. Love you guys. I am thankful for you guys, and I hope you have the absolute best Thanksgiving week ahead. and you're celebrating your family, your friends, and your members. And I will see you after Thanksgiving. Okay.
Thanks,
You too,
Tammy.
Tammy.
Bye, guys.
Night.